Paralyzed and forgotten, Mr. Okawa sat helpless, betrayed by the woman he loved most, drowning in silent, endless pain. Subscribe to this YouTube channel as we tell the heartbreaking story of Mr. Okawa. Mr. Okawa was a good man. He was tall, handsome, and strong. Every morning, he woke up early, put on his shirt and trousers, and went to work. He was a builder, and he loved his job. He worked hard to make sure his wife, Mrs. Patience, and their 2 children had everything they needed. He built a big house for them, bought a nice car, and made sure there was always food on the table. People in the town respected Mr. Okawa. They said he was a good husband and a good father. He loved Mrs. Patience so much. Every day, he gave her money for the market. Every weekend, he took her out to eat good food. He treated her like a queen. Even when he was tired, he would still smile and listen to her talk about her day. He believed that love meant sacrifice. But life changed suddenly for Mr. Okawa. One hot afternoon, while he was working on a building site, he felt a sharp pain on the left side of his body. He tried to call for help, but his mouth could not move. His hand dropped the brick he was holding. His legs became weak. Before anyone could reach him, Mr. Okawa fell to the ground. The workers shouted and rushed him to the hospital. The doctor said Mr. Okawa had suffered a stroke. The stroke was so bad that he became paralyzed on one side of his body. He could no longer walk, talk properly, or even feed himself without help. He needed a wheelchair. He needed someone to bathe him, feed him, clean him, and help him do everything. His whole life changed in just one day. At first, Mrs. Patience cried and acted like she cared. She sat by his hospital bed and held his hand. She told visitors, "God will heal my husband." But deep in her heart, Mrs. Patience was angry. She was angry that the man who once made life sweet for her was now a burden. She hated the smell of the hospital. She hated the way nurses looked at her with pity. She hated having to take care of Mr. Okawa. When Mr. Okawa was finally brought home in a wheelchair, the real suffering began. Mrs. Patience no longer smiled at him. She no longer called him my love like before. She would cook food and eat it without giving him any. Sometimes, she would leave him sitting for hours in his wheelchair, dirty and hungry. Mr. Okawa would cry silently, the tears running down his cheeks. He could not even wipe them away by himself. Neighbors began to notice that Mrs. Patience was changing. She wore fine clothes, fixed her nails, painted her lips, and stayed out late at night. When they asked her, "Where is your husband?" she would roll her eyes and say, "He is at home, sitting like a bag of rice." Mr. Okawa heard her one day when she said that to a neighbor. His heart broke into pieces. The woman he loved with all his heart now spoke about him like he was nothing. But he could do nothing. He could not walk. He could not fight. He could only sit and cry. Worse things followed. One day, Mrs. Patience brought another man into their home. A young, strong man. She said he was her cousin, but everyone knew he was not. She laughed loudly with him. She cooked special meals for him. She wore short dresses around him. And she made Mr. Okawa sit there, watching it all, helpless like a child. Sometimes at night, when she thought Mr. Okawa was asleep, Mrs. Patience would sneak into the guest room where the young man stayed. Mr. Okawa could hear the laughter, the whispers, the sounds. He wanted to die. He prayed for death. But death did not come. Only pain stayed with him, like a shadow. Mrs. Patience stopped cleaning him properly. She would leave him sitting in his waste for hours. The smell filled the house. She would shout at him, "You are disgusting. You are useless. I can't waste my life cleaning you every day." Then she would leave the house, slamming the door, while Mr. Okawa sat there alone, the flies buzzing around him. The children, too, began to change. They no longer came to greet him when they came back from school. Mrs. Patience told them, "Your father is cursed. Stay away from him if you don't want to end up useless too." Slowly, even his own children stopped loving him. Mr. Okawa's once bright house became dark and cold. The walls that once echoed with laughter now only had the sound of his weeping. He would stare at the ceiling for hours, asking God why he was still alive. He thought of the days he carried bags of cement under the hot sun to build a life for his family. Now, all he had built was crumbling in front of his eyes. And Mrs. Patience. She lived her life as if he did not exist. She wore new clothes every week, went to parties every weekend, laughed, danced, and flaunted herself around town. People who once envied her marriage now shook their heads in pity when they passed Mr. Okawa's house. But nobody helped him. Nobody stood up for him. He was left alone with his pain, his shame, and his broken heart. The days turned into months, and Mr. Okawa's pain only grew worse. His body was frozen, but his mind was wide awake, trapped inside a shell he could no longer control. But what hurt him more than the stroke was the cruelty of the woman he once called his wife, Mrs. Patience. Mrs. Patience had changed completely. The woman who once held his hand and said, "I will stand by you," now treated him worse than a stray dog. She no longer cared if anyone saw her wickedness. She no longer cared if he lived or died. One cold morning, while the wind whistled outside and the house was silent, Mr. Okawa sat quietly in his wheelchair by the window, trying to catch a little morning sun to warm his broken body. Suddenly, Mrs. Patience stormed into the room. Her face was twisted with anger, her eyes filled with hatred. "What are you staring at, you useless log of wood?" she shouted. Mr. Okawa opened his mouth slightly to speak, but only a soft broken sound came out. He tried to lift his hand, maybe to beg her for peace, but his hand only twitched helplessly on the armrest. Mrs. Patience marched toward him. Without warning, she spat heavily on his face. Thick, slimy spit rolled down Mr. Okawa's cheek, but he could not wipe it off. He could not even turn his face away. He sat there, frozen in shame, tears gathering in his eyes. He felt like a helpless child, humiliated, broken, and abandoned by the woman he loved with all his heart. But Mrs. Patience was not finished. "You disgust me," she hissed. She disappeared into the kitchen and came back holding a big bucket of cold water. Mr. Okawa's heart pounded painfully in his chest. He tried to shake his head, to beg her not to do it, but his body refused to obey. With a wicked smile, Mrs. Patience lifted the bucket high and poured the entire freezing cold water over him. The water hit him hard, splashing over his head, soaking his thin clothes, running down his body like ice knives. The shock made him jerk violently in his wheelchair. He gasped, his teeth clattering uncontrollably, his whole body shivering from the terrible cold. The floor became wet and slippery. Water dripped from his hair, from his shirt, from his trousers. He looked like a wet sack left out in a storm. And Mrs. Patience. She stood there laughing. She laughed so hard that she bent over, holding her stomach. "Look at you," she mocked between fits of laughter. A great man, now reduced to nothing but a helpless piece of trash. She clapped her hands like someone watching a funny play. "Maybe next time, you will think twice before getting sick and turning into a useless vegetable," she sneered. She threw the empty bucket to the side and walked away, leaving Mr. Okawa sitting in the pool of freezing water. He sat there for hours, shaking, trembling, his heart breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. Nobody came to help him. Nobody came to cover him. The cold bit into his skin, the wetness made him smell, but Mrs. Patience did not care. Later that day, a young neighbor boy, who used to help around the house, came in and found Mr. Okawa still sitting in his wet clothes, his body trembling violently. But instead of helping, the boy pulled out his phone and started recording him. "See the mighty Mr. Okawa," the boy mocked, laughing cruelly. He sent the video around the neighborhood. Soon, people who once respected Mr. Okawa saw him and laughed. They whispered behind his back. They turned away from him. His friends stopped visiting. His family members made excuses. It was as if he had died, but his body was still breathing. And Mrs. Patience. She loved every moment of his suffering. Every day, she found new ways to torture him. She would sometimes leave him without food all day. She would insult him loudly, calling him cursed and good for nothing until even the neighbors could hear. At night, when the house grew dark and silent, and Mr. Okawa cried quietly in his corner, Mrs. Patience would sometimes tiptoe close to him and whisper into his ear, "I wish you would just die and free me from this prison." Then she would laugh, turn up the music, and dance around the house while he sat there, soaking wet, broken, and forgotten. Mr. Okawa was alive, but it was not a life. It was a slow, painful death, one moment at a time. Days passed, and the cruelty of Mrs. Patience grew darker. Mr. Okawa's body was already weak from the stroke, but now, hunger joined hands with pain to torture him even more. Mrs. Patience had stopped giving him food. In the beginning, she would at least throw a plate of cold rice near him, letting him struggle like an animal to eat. But now, she did not even bother. She cooked large pots of delicious food, jollof rice, pepper soup, fried meat, but none of it was for him. Mr. Okawa would sit by the corner, his stomach growling loudly, his throat dry, his lips cracked from thirst. He watched her eat, bite after bite, laughing loudly while she filled her mouth. Sometimes, she would chew slowly in front of him on purpose, making loud smacking sounds just to torment him. "You can smell it, can't you?" she mocked, waving a piece of fried chicken under his nose. "You can smell it, but you can never taste it again, you useless thing." Mr. Okawa could not speak. He could not fight. He could only stare with hollow eyes, begging silently for a crumb, a spoonful, anything, but Mrs. Patience's heart was made of iron. One afternoon, when the hunger became too much to bear, Mr. Okawa tried to move his wheelchair towards the kitchen. His hands were weak and shaky, his legs useless. He pushed with all the strength left in his broken body. Inching little by little, he finally reached the kitchen door, panting heavily, sweat pouring down his thin face. Mrs. Patience stood inside, frying plantains. The sweet smell filled the air. "Please," he whispered, barely able to get the word out. "Please, food." Mrs. Patience turned around slowly, looking at him as if he were an insect. "You want food?" she asked coldly. Without waiting for a reply, she grabbed the hot frying pan and swung it towards him. Mr. Okawa flinched in fear, but he couldn't move fast enough. The hot oil splashed on his hand, burning his skin. He let out a broken, painful cry, a sound so small, so weak, it would have broken the heart of anyone with pity. But not Mrs. Patience. She laughed. She laughed so loudly that it echoed through the empty house. "Next time," she said, "think twice before dragging your cursed body into my kitchen." She kicked the wheelchair hard, sending Mr. Okawa rolling backward until he hit the wall with a heavy thud. His head knocked against the wall, and for a moment, the world spun around him. Tears poured from his eyes, but Mrs. Patience simply dusted her hands and continued cooking, humming happily to herself. For 2 days, she left him there, no food, no water, no help. At night, rats came crawling around him, sniffing his clothes, nibbling at his fingers. Mosquitoes feasted on his open wounds. The cold air of the night wrapped around his wet body like a cruel blanket. He called out for help, but no one came. His voice was too weak, and the neighbors had learned to ignore any noise from their house. They believed Mrs. Patience when she told them he was crazy and no longer in his right senses. Each hour stretched into a long, painful eternity. His stomach twisted and turned inside him. His mouth felt like dry sandpaper. His bones ached. His heart ached even more. And still, Mrs. Patience lived her life as if he did not exist. She went to parties. She laughed with friends. She wore bright dresses and painted her face with makeup, while the man who once gave her everything was wasting away, inch by inch, breath by breath. One night, when the stars were hidden behind dark clouds and the air smelled of rain, Mr. Okawa lay in the dark, his body trembling, his soul begging God for mercy. "God," he whispered into the empty room, "if this is life, take me. Please, take me." But death did not come. Only more hunger. Only more loneliness. Only more pain. And somewhere in the house, Mrs. Patience sang joyfully to herself, not knowing that every note she sang was another nail in Mr. Okawa's slowly breaking heart. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon that help finally came, when all hope seemed lost. Dr. Samuel, Mr. Okawa's childhood friend, had returned home after many years of practicing medicine in the United Kingdom. He had not seen Mr. Okawa for a long time, but he had always remembered him, the friend who had once shared his last meal with him back in their struggling days. The first place Dr. Samuel went after settling back in town was Mr. Okawa's house. He had asked around, and what he heard disturbed him. Neighbors whispered that Mr. Okawa had gone mad, that his wife was taking care of him, but something in their voices made Dr. Samuel feel uneasy. When Dr. Samuel reached the house, he knocked and waited. Mrs. Patience opened the door, wearing a short dress, her lips stained red with lipstick, her eyes rolling with irritation. "What do you want?" she snapped, not even greeting him properly. "I'm here to see my friend." "Where is Okawa?" Dr. Samuel asked gently. Mrs. Patience scoffed. "Your friend is now a vegetable. Go and see him if you like. He's somewhere in this house, rotting away." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving the door open. Dr. Samuel stepped inside and immediately his heart broke into pieces. There, lying on the cold floor by the wall, was Mr. Okawa, thin like a skeleton, his skin dry and pale, his clothes soaked with sweat and dirt, his eyes half closed in pain. "Jesus Christ!" Dr. Samuel cried out, rushing to his side. Mr. Okawa blinked weakly, tears sliding from his eyes as he recognized his old friend. "My brother," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. You came. Dr. Samuel knelt beside him, lifting him carefully. He could feel every bone poking through his friend's skin. The smell of neglect filled the room. Dr. Samuel bit his lip hard to keep from crying. "Who did this to you?" he asked. But he already knew. Without wasting a minute, Dr. Samuel called for an ambulance. He fought Mrs. Patience when she tried to block the door, shouting that Mr. Okawa had no right to leave without her permission. "I will deal with you later," Dr. Samuel warned her coldly. In less than an hour, Mr. Okawa was in a hospital bed, clean, warm, fed, and cared for by gentle nurses. For 3 weeks, Dr. Samuel stayed by his side. He gave him proper medication. He brought in a physiotherapist to help him move his limbs. He fed him with healthy food. He talked to him, encouraged him, reminded him of the strong man he once was. Slowly, day by day, Mr. Okawa's strength returned. The color came back to his cheeks. His voice grew louder. He started to sit up on his own. Then, one day, after a long therapy session, Mr. Okawa moved his leg slightly, just a twitch, but it was a miracle. Dr. Samuel cheered him on, tears in his eyes. "You will walk again, Okawa," he promised. "You will live again." True to his word, after 3 weeks, Mr. Okawa stood with help. Then he took a step. Then 2. Then, without help, he walked across the hospital room, trembling but smiling with tears pouring from his face. The nurses clapped. Dr. Samuel hugged him tightly. "You are a fighter," he said. "You are not finished." Mr. Okawa nodded. He felt alive again. He felt like a man again. And with that new strength burning in his heart, he made a decision: he would never go back to Mrs. Patience. The day he was discharged from the hospital, he returned to the house, but not with weak hands. He came with the police. Mrs. Patience was sitting outside, painting her nails, laughing with a young man who had been visiting her secretly while Mr. Okawa suffered. When she saw Mr. Okawa standing tall, clean, and healthy, her mouth fell open. How?" she stammered, dropping her nail polish. Mr. Okawa looked at her with eyes cold as ice. "I am no longer your prisoner," he said calmly. "I came to collect my things, and my freedom." The police officer stepped forward. "You are hereby served divorce papers," they said. "Mr. Okawa no longer wishes to be married to you." Mrs. Patience screamed and shouted, trying to tear the papers apart, but it was too late. The neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves. Some shook their heads sadly. Some said, "Good for her." Mrs. Patience was dragged inside by the police for questioning about her abuse. Her shame was complete. The whole community now knew the evil she had hidden behind closed doors. As Mr. Okawa packed his few belongings, he paused for one last look at the house he had once built with dreams of love and family. Tears filled his eyes, not from weakness, but from the deep sorrow of wasted years. He regretted ever meeting Mrs. Patience. He regretted ever calling her his wife. He regretted giving his heart to a woman who crushed it under her feet. If only I had married wisely, he whispered to himself as he turned away. From that day, Mr. Okawa started a new life. He moved into a small apartment near Dr. Samuel's clinic. He opened a small business. He laughed again. He smiled again. But deep in his heart, the scars Mrs. Patience left would never fully heal. They were invisible wounds, but they were real, a reminder that not all enemies come from outside. Sometimes, the ones we love the most are the ones who destroy us the deepest. And every time Mr. Okawa saw a woman walking down the street, he remembered the bitter lesson life had taught him. A wicked woman is worse than a deadly disease.